So I'll share a story, personal story, just so that maybe this will, will make it a little bit more real for you. So I was in Belgium. This must have been 2000. It was either 2007 or 2008. I was in a hotel attempting to sleep. I say attempting to sleep, but I don't know if that's really fair. I thought I was attempting to sleep, but I felt like I was suffocating. And I felt like I was suffocating. It would not, when I tell you why, it won't seem odd at all. I was wearing a face mask with this really thick carbon filter in it. And this was before face masks were a thing. This was way before that. And so this was a face mask that was sold. I imagine it had to have been made and sold by people who I could really only say paranoids. For paranoids, I was certainly a paranoid. And so I had purchased this thing because I was paranoid and I was convinced that I was very special and sensitive and couldn't tolerate many things that if I was in a hotel, there would be things in there that I couldn't tolerate to breathe because if I breathe them, then it would be, very, very bad. And I was convinced that I had lots of evidence that this was true, that I was very special in this way, and poor me, I didn't, I wouldn't have wanted to have had to have been in that situation in that condition, but there I was, and I was forced to be in this way. So there I was trying to sleep, so supposedly, but I really felt like it was suffocating because I was wearing this thing, self-induced. So why was I doing that? Well, because I had really believed that, like I said, I was convinced that I was a victim of being very special and sensitive in these ways, and most of the rest of the population is not sensitive in these ways, so they're not bothered or they don't know that they're bothered. But I can't tolerate all of these things, so I have to take special precautions. I have to wear this, suffocating face mask while I was trying to sleep. And I was in Belgium because I had chosen to do this. Had been invited to speak at a series of conferences in Europe, and because I worked as a software developer at the time, and I was often invited to speak at conferences. So I had been invited to speak at a couple of conferences, and there I was. Um, so that was my life. My life was that I did those kinds of things. I lived in that way. It was absolutely terrible. It was just misery. I was causing tremendous amounts of suffering for myself and probably others around me, just day in and day out. And I had all kinds of stories over the years about who was to blame for this. I thought it was some sort of conspiracy. I thought it was a conspiracy at one point. And at another point, I thought, and it's not a conspiracy. It's just because people are stupid. But it was other people. It's other people who were responsible. And then at another point, I thought, well, it's not necessarily a conspiracy per se, but it's at the same time, it's not really. Neither is it just that people are stupid. It's kind of us versus them. So at a certain point, I even went down this line where I thought, well, the industrial civilization is the problem and need to find a way to end industrial civilization. So I went down that pathway for a while. So I had all kinds of things, all kinds of ideas about what the problem was. And, but all the variations on what I thought the problem was still were things outside of me. It was systems and people and situations and circumstances that were outside of me. And so I was a victim of all that. No matter what I was doing, I was a victim of that. And always those things were, well, I mean, obviously they were out of my control. Um, and they were bigger than me. And so it was just a completely unmanageable situation. It took until 2012 until things got really, really, really bad when I finally realized just how unmanageable it was. So one would have hoped that it might have become a lot more obvious to me much earlier in the process that it was unmanageable, but it wasn't. And this is often probably how it goes. I mean, you've probably noticed that it's easier to recognize in other people when they're what they're doing and their attitudes are completely insane and unmanageable. But it's more challenging to recognize it in yourself or to admit it. maybe it's not even that difficult to recognize it, but it's more difficult to admit it. So you probably either know people or you know of people, and you can look at them and just say, well, gee, they're kind of they have some crazy thoughts, right? They're blaming other people for things that they should just take responsibility for themselves. They can make better choices and have a better experience. So it's easy to make those judgments about other people. But then if you really take a look at your own life, well, you could try this. Try taking a look at your own life from an outside perspective. So imagine seeing your own life as somebody else might see you. Just for a moment now, just notice if you were to see yourself as others might see you. And particularly in regard to the problems that you perceive you have in life. Might you be able to then recognize that maybe there are some different, more useful ways of looking at things that might give you better results. So that might be a useful thing. Just easy, low-hanging fruit. Just it's a little game where you just imagine seeing yourself from an outside perspective, from a third person perspective. And that might be useful. It might help you to recognize how you've been playing some unhelpful games and deceiving yourself and deluding yourself. And so you could start to see things in a way that might be more empowering for you. You might start to realize that you can make some different choices.